What if the kids playing outside your window at night weren't really kids at all? The first time Emma heard the laughter, she thought it was just a dream. She woke up around 2:14 a.m., the digital clock glowing faintly red on her nightstand, casting thin shadows on the bedroom walls. At first, she couldn't place the sound. It was faint, but not muffled like a TV through the walls, not mechanical like the creak of the old farmhouse settling. It was sharper, high-pitched. Laughter. Children's laughter. Her eyes opened wider, adjusting to the moonlight spilling through the window, and she froze. It was unmistakable now. A chorus of giggles floated in through the glass, carried on the cool September air. She sat up slowly, holding her breath as the sound swelled, then dipped into a quieter rhythm, almost like a game of tag. Emma whispered, "James, do you hear that?" Her husband stirred beside her, groaning. "What?" "Kids. Outside." That got him upright. James rubbed his eyes, squinting at the window. "At this hour? You sure it's not just foxes or something? They make weird sounds." Emma shook her head. "That's not a fox. That's laughter." They both sat there for a long moment, listening. The sound drifted again, closer this time. A giggle, then another, overlapping, full of breathless joy. But there was something odd about it, something that made Emma's skin prickle. It was too precise. Too uniform, like each laugh had the same pitch, the same rise and fall, repeating as though practiced. "Where the hell are their parents?" James muttered, sliding out of bed. He pulled back the curtain just an inch and peered outside. Moonlight painted the yard in silvery blues and deep shadows. Beyond the fence line, the woods stretched dark and dense, branches moving in the breeze like skeletal fingers. For a few seconds, there was nothing, only the sound. Then, movement. "There," James whispered. Emma climbed out of bed and pressed her face against the glass beside him. She almost wished she hadn't. Near the edge of the woods, shapes darted between the trees. Small, quick bodies. Their movements were strange, jerky, unnatural, as if each step was both graceful and wrong at the same time. She saw pale arms flash under the moonlight, heads turning sharply as if sniffing the air. And then, eyes. Dozens of tiny, glowing eyes reflecting back at the house. Emma gasped and stumbled back from the window. James let the curtain fall shut instantly. For a long while, neither of them said anything. Only the laughter filled the silence, surrounding the house now like a ring of sound. Finally, James broke the tension. "Probably just neighborhood kids messing around. We're new here. Maybe it's a thing." Emma gave him a look. "James, those weren't normal kids." He forced a chuckle, but it was hollow. "You've been watching too many horror movies. They're kids. That's all." But Emma could see his jaw tighten, the way his hand flexed near the curtain. He didn't believe what he was saying either. That night, neither of them slept much. The next morning, the sun came warm and golden, spilling over the fields and turning the farmhouse into something cozy, safe, almost idyllic. Over coffee, Emma laughed at herself, telling James maybe he was right, maybe it had just been a local group of kids sneaking out late. Rural towns had their quirks, after all. But when she stepped outside to grab the newspaper, her blood ran cold. In the soft dirt by the porch steps, just below the kitchen window, were small footprints. Dozens of them. Bare feet, pressed deep into the earth, circling the house. She dropped the paper and called out for James. He came running, and when he saw the prints, he went pale. "Kids don't walk barefoot out here," Emma whispered. "There's rocks, glass, thorns. Look at them, some are so small, James. Toddlers, even." James crouched low, tracing the shape of one print with his finger. "These aren't fresh," he muttered. But Emma noticed the soil was still damp with morning dew, and the prints had sharp edges. They were fresh. Very fresh. That night, Emma made sure every window was locked, every curtain drawn tight. But around 2 a.m., like clockwork, the laughter returned. This time, it was louder. Closer. Emma sat up, clutching James's arm. "They're back," she whispered. He sighed, throwing the blanket off. "That's it. I'm going out there." "Are you insane?" Emma hissed. But James was already pulling on his boots. "We can't just let them screw around our property every night. I'll scare them off." Emma tried to stop him, but he kissed her forehead quickly and slipped out the back door with a flashlight. She stood by the window, heart hammering, watching the beam cut across the yard. The laughter grew frantic, darting left and right through the trees, circling him. James turned fast, shining the light into the woods. Then the laughter stopped. The silence was worse. Emma pressed her face to the glass, desperate to see him. The flashlight beam shook once, twice, then froze. "James," she whispered, though he couldn't hear her. Something moved just beyond the beam. Dozens of shapes, stepping forward slowly from the tree line. Pale faces, hair hanging limp, eyes glowing faintly in the light. They stood perfectly still, too still, watching him. James lifted the flashlight higher. "Hey! Enough games. Go home." The children didn't move. Then, in perfect unison, they smiled. Every single one. Emma gasped, stumbling back from the window. And then the flashlight went out. Darkness swallowed the yard. For a few heart-stopping moments, Emma saw nothing at all. Just the black void outside the window, heavy and suffocating. The flashlight beam was gone, swallowed up in the endless dark, and James's figure was nowhere to be seen. Her breath caught in her throat. The laughter had stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the night hollow and eerily silent. She pressed her forehead against the glass, straining to catch even the faintest outline of her husband. But there was only the faint rustle of the trees, a breeze moving across the field, and the steady thud of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then, footsteps. Not James's heavy, grounded stride, but a rapid scattering of tiny feet moving over soil and grass, surrounding the house again. Emma's skin crawled as the sound encircled her, quick and chaotic like the scurrying of insects. She stumbled backward, hands trembling, almost expecting to hear fingernails scratching at the glass. But instead, the noise stopped as abruptly as it started, replaced by something worse, a faint tapping. 1, 2, 3 light knocks against the window pane, as though a child were standing right outside her bedroom, asking politely to be let in. Emma screamed and staggered toward the door, fumbling with the handle. She needed to get to James. He was still out there, in the dark with those things. She rushed down the stairs barefoot, ignoring the sharp creak of the old wood under her weight, and threw open the back door. Cold night air slapped her face as she stepped into the yard, her eyes darting wildly between the fields and the tree line. "James," she cried, her voice carrying into the emptiness. "James, where are you?" For several seconds there was nothing. Then, faintly, she heard his voice calling back. I'm here." Her chest loosened in relief. She spotted him finally, emerging from the woods, flashlight flickering weakly back to life in his hand. He walked briskly across the field, his face pale in the moonlight, eyes wide. She ran to him, colliding into his chest, gripping his shirt like a lifeline. "Don't you ever do that again," she sobbed, pressing her face against him. "Don't leave me here alone like that." James wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I'm okay, I'm fine. They're just kids, Emma. I saw them. Real kids. Weird, sure, but nothing supernatural. Just local kids screwing around." Emma pulled back enough to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "No, James. They aren't normal. Did you see the way they moved? The way they all smiled at once?" Her voice broke into a whisper. "Children don't do that." James hesitated. For just a moment, his expression flickered with doubt. Then he forced a smile and kissed her forehead again. "It's fine. Come on, let's get back inside before we freeze." But as they walked toward the house, Emma noticed something strange. His grip on her hand was too tight. His stride was stiff, like each step took effort. And his skin, it felt cold. Too cold, as though he'd been standing in a freezer, not just outside in the night air. Back inside, James tried to brush it off, making coffee to warm them both, pretending that nothing unusual had happened. He even cracked jokes, though his laughter sounded hollow. Emma sat at the table, watching him closely, her fingers drumming nervously against the wood. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him back. That night, she barely slept. Every time her eyes fluttered shut, she jerked awake again, certain she'd heard whispering outside the window. When dawn finally arrived, she was almost relieved, though the exhaustion made her limbs heavy and her thoughts sluggish. James, on the other hand, seemed unusually energetic, whistling to himself as he fixed breakfast, humming little tunes that Emma had never heard him hum before. By mid-morning, the doorbell rang. Startled, Emma answered to find an elderly woman standing on the porch, leaning heavily on a cane. Her face was deeply lined, her gray hair pinned back neatly, her expression both wary and curious. "You're the new couple who bought the farmhouse," the woman said without introduction. Her voice was raspy, carrying the weight of someone who had smoked for decades. "I live down the road." Emma nodded politely, forcing a smile. "Yes, that's us. I'm Emma, and this is my husband, James." The woman's eyes flicked past Emma's shoulder into the house, then back to her. "You've heard them, haven't you?" Emma froze. "Heard, what?" The old woman leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "The children. At night. Laughing." Emma's blood turned to ice. "You know about them?" she whispered. The woman nodded gravely. "Everyone around here does. That's why the house sat empty for so long. People don't stay after they hear them. They think it's just stories, at first, just kids. But it's not. They aren't kids. Haven't been for a long, long time." Emma gripped the doorframe, her knees weak. "What are they?" The woman's eyes darkened. "No one knows for sure. Some say they're the spirits of children who died in the woods long ago. Some say they're something else entirely, something older, wearing the shape of children to lure people in. All I know is, once they notice you, they don't stop. They'll keep coming back. Night after night." Emma swallowed hard, her mouth dry. "What do they want?" The old woman's gaze lingered on her, then flicked again toward James, who had stepped into the hallway behind her. Her expression shifted, tightening in a way Emma didn't understand. She shook her head slowly, backing away. "They want to play," she whispered. "But don't let them. Don't you ever let them." With that, the woman turned and shuffled down the steps, her cane tapping against the wood, leaving Emma standing frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding like a drum. Behind her, James chuckled softly. "Crazy old bat," he muttered. "Don't let her scare you." But when Emma looked back at him, really looked, something twisted deep inside her chest. Because the way James smiled at her in that moment, the curve of his lips, the gleam in his eyes, was the exact same smile she'd seen on the children in the woods. Emma told herself she was imagining things. She had to be. James was her husband, the man she'd married 3 years ago, the man who made her coffee every morning exactly the way she liked it, 2 sugars, a splash of cream. The man who hummed while he fixed leaky faucets and who still teased her when she jumped at horror movies. Surely a smile couldn't mean anything. Surely exhaustion was twisting her perception, making her see something that wasn't there. And yet, no matter how she tried to push the thought aside, a sick unease rooted itself inside her chest and refused to let go. For the rest of that day, she found herself watching him in ways she never had before. Subtle things unnerved her, the way he tapped his fingers against the table in a perfect, steady rhythm, the way he laughed a little too loudly at nothing in particular, the way his eyes sometimes lingered on her just a beat too long, as though studying her. She caught herself staring, then quickly looking away, ashamed of her own suspicion. But every time she glanced back, James was smiling at her again, that same faintly crooked smile that reminded her of the children's faces in the woods. That evening, as the sky darkened into a heavy gray twilight, Emma busied herself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. James had gone outside to split some firewood, his axe thudding rhythmically against the stump in the yard. She tried to relax, telling herself it was normal, that he was normal, but the unease grew heavier with each passing second. When she glanced out the window, she froze. James stood with his back to her, the axe raised over his shoulder, but he wasn't moving. He was just standing there. Perfectly still. The woods loomed behind him, black and watchful, and for a moment she thought she saw pale faces in the shadows again, dozens of them, peering out from between the trees. She blinked hard, and they were gone. James lowered the axe then, splitting the log with a swift, practiced strike, as if nothing had happened. That night, Emma locked the doors and double-checked the windows twice over. James teased her for being paranoid, but she didn't care. Sleep came fitfully, heavy with strange, fragmented dreams, children's laughter echoing down hallways, James standing at the foot of their bed, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark, whispering words she couldn't quite understand. She woke with a start sometime past 3 a.m., her throat dry, her skin clammy with sweat. The room was silent. James wasn't beside her. Panic clawed at her chest. She slid out of bed, her bare feet touching the cold floor, and crept through the hallway. The boards groaned beneath her weight, though she tried to move lightly. The house felt too big in the darkness, every shadow swollen and alive, every corner holding secrets. She found herself whispering his name, almost afraid to raise her voice. James? No answer. Then she heard it, the front door opening with a soft creak. She hurried down the stairs, just in time to see James slipping out into the night, barefoot, his posture oddly relaxed, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. Emma's stomach knotted. She pressed her palm against the doorframe, holding herself still, afraid to call out. Through the crack of the door, she saw him step into the yard, his figure silver in the moonlight. And then she heard it again. The laughter. It rippled through the trees like wind chimes, shrill and overlapping, sending gooseflesh crawling up her arms. She wanted to scream at him, to drag him back inside, but she couldn't move. James was walking toward the woods, and the children were waiting for him. The pale shapes emerged slowly, slipping between the trees like they belonged there, like shadows given flesh. Dozens of them. Their eyes glowed faintly, catching the moonlight, and their thin bodies swayed as though caught in some rhythm. They didn't run to him. They didn't scatter in fear. They just stood there, smiling, watching as James approached. And then, in eerie unison, they raised their hands and beckoned. Emma's breath caught in her throat. He was going to follow them. Something inside her snapped. She shoved the door open and ran into the cold night, calling his name with a voice that cracked on the edges. James! Stop! He froze mid-step, his body stiffening. For a moment, she thought he hadn't heard her, but then he turned. Slowly. Too slowly. His face caught the light, and her heart nearly stopped. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown wide and empty, and his lips stretched into that same unnatural smile she'd seen on the children. You should come with us, Em, he said softly, almost gently. They just want to play. The words chilled her to her bones. They weren't his words. They weren't his voice. Not really. Emma backed away, shaking her head violently. No. You're scaring me. Please, James, come inside. The children began to move then, stepping closer, their small feet silent against the earth. She could hear them giggling under their breath, the sound overlapping and echoing unnaturally, like it was coming from inside her skull rather than from the woods. James tilted his head again, his expression calm, almost pleading. They'll take care of us, he murmured. Don't you understand? No pain. No time. Just play. Forever. Emma's legs trembled, but instinct took over. She turned and ran back into the house, slamming the door behind her and locking it with shaking hands. She pressed her back against the wood, listening, waiting. The laughter rose again, louder, surrounding the house, 100 tiny voices calling her name. Emma, come play. Emma, come outside. She sank to the floor, covering her ears, rocking back and forth as tears stung her eyes. For hours, the voices persisted, scratching at the edges of her sanity. By the time dawn broke, she was exhausted, her body aching, her mind frayed. She dared to peek through the curtains once, just once, and saw the yard empty, the woods still, as if nothing had ever happened. James was gone. He didn't return that morning. Not by noon. Not by evening. And as the sun set again, Emma sat alone in the quiet farmhouse, dread pooling in her stomach. She knew the children would be back. And this time, she wasn't sure she'd be able to keep them out. Emma didn't open the curtains again for 2 days. The house became her shield, her prison, and her confessional. She wandered from room to room in silence, clutching the mug of coffee she barely sipped, staring at the walls as though they might crack open and offer answers. The farmhouse creaked and groaned with the wind, its old bones sighing under the weight of time. Every sound made her jump. The soft rattle of the pipes, the faint scurry of a mouse in the attic, it all seemed to bleed into something larger, something darker, something waiting. James's absence gnawed at her. Part of her clung desperately to the idea that he'd simply walked away, maybe confused, maybe under some strange spell. That any moment now, he'd stroll through the front door with a sheepish smile and a story about getting lost in the woods. But deep down, she knew better. The man who had turned to her in the moonlight, with eyes too wide and a smile that didn't belong to him, that wasn't her husband anymore. Whatever had stood in her yard that night had been something else wearing his skin. By the third day, she couldn't take the silence anymore. She dug James's laptop out of his office and sat down at the kitchen table, determined to find something, anything, that might explain what was happening in these woods. At first, she searched for stories about the town itself. The farmhouse was in a remote rural patch of upstate New York, the kind of place where history lived in whispers and was passed down through generations instead of written in books. She found little online, just census numbers, old county records, scattered mentions of logging companies and farming disputes. Nothing about children. Nothing about the woods. Frustrated, she widened her search: children's laughter woods, strange children rural legends, ghost kids folklore. Slowly, a picture began to take shape, though not one she fully understood. Stories from across the country about pale children who appeared at night, knocking on windows, asking to come inside. In some places they were called the Pale Ones. In others, the Hollow Children. Different towns, different names, but the pattern was the same: once they noticed you, they never left. Emma leaned closer to the screen, heart pounding. One blog post, written by a self-proclaimed paranormal investigator, caught her attention. It described an abandoned village in Pennsylvania where, decades earlier, people had reported hearing children playing outside at night. Soon after, residents began to disappear, one by one, until the place was empty. The writer claimed the last diary found in the town had one final entry, scrawled hastily: "They want to play forever." Emma slammed the laptop shut, bile rising in her throat. She pressed her hands to her face, whispering, "No, no, no," as if denying the words could undo them. But denial didn't change the truth. James was gone, and she was alone in a house marked by something that wanted her too. That night, she made preparations. She dragged the heaviest furniture she could find in front of the doors, shoved chairs under the knobs, and checked each window latch twice over. She lit candles in every room, telling herself the light might keep them away, though deep down she knew it wouldn't matter. The children weren't flesh and blood. Locks and wood wouldn't stop them if they wanted in. When the clock struck midnight, the laughter began. It was faint at first, like distant bells, but it grew steadily, until it wrapped around the house in a mocking chorus. Emma sat in the living room clutching a kitchen knife, her breath shallow, eyes darting toward every sound. She heard them running through the grass, circling, tapping against the siding, whispering her name. Then, 3 soft knocks on the window. She turned slowly. There they were. 3 pale faces pressed against the glass, their smiles stretched too wide, their eyes gleaming with moonlight. They didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Just watched her. One of them lifted a hand and tapped again, a polite little knock, as if asking permission to come inside. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, whispering over and over, "You can't come in, you can't come in." When she opened them again, the children were gone. But the laughter, oh, the laughter, echoed through the house, bouncing from wall to wall until she couldn't tell if it was outside or inside anymore. Suddenly, a voice whispered behind her ear. "Emma." She spun around, knife raised, but there was nothing. Only the flickering candlelight painting shadows across the walls. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. She didn't remember falling asleep, but at some point exhaustion claimed her. When she opened her eyes, pale dawn was bleeding into the sky. The house was quiet, eerily so, as though the night before had been nothing but a dream. But when she rose from the floor, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The chair she had wedged under the front door was moved. Not by much, just a few inches to the side, as though someone had pushed it gently while opening the door. Emma's stomach lurched. She ran to the door, checking the lock. Still bolted. But the rug beneath the threshold was damp with morning dew, and faint muddy footprints, tiny, bare feet, tracked across the wood floor, circling lazily through the living room before vanishing into nothing. She wasn't safe anymore. That afternoon, desperate for answers, Emma returned to the old woman down the road. The house was a crumbling colonial with boarded windows and a sagging porch, but smoke curled from the chimney, and the faint scent of burning wood hung in the air. Emma knocked timidly, her nerves frayed. The woman opened the door slowly, eyes narrowing. "I told you not to let them in." "I didn't," Emma cried. "I swear I didn't. But they were here. Inside. Somehow, they got inside." The woman's gaze softened slightly, though her expression was grim. "Then you don't have much time. Once they cross your threshold, you're theirs. They'll toy with you, confuse you, wear you down. They'll whisper and laugh until you can't tell what's real anymore. And then, when you're weak enough, they'll take you." Emma's voice shook. "Take me where?" The woman hesitated, her jaw tightening, as though saying the words would make them more real. Finally, she whispered, "Into the woods. And if they take you there, you don't come back." The old woman's words clung to Emma like a second skin as she walked back to the farmhouse, the gravel crunching under her boots, the gray sky pressing low and heavy above. "If they take you into the woods, you don't come back." The sentence repeated itself in her mind with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, quick and uneven. Every step closer to the house filled her with dread. It wasn't home anymore. It wasn't safety. It was a hunting ground, a cage, a place the children circled and tested like wolves waiting for a door to open. By the time she reached the porch, her legs felt like lead. She paused at the front steps, staring at the farmhouse as if seeing it for the first time. The windows glared back at her like watchful eyes, dark and expressionless. The prints from the night before, the tiny bare feet that had trailed across her living room, were still there, faint but undeniable. She fought the urge to turn and run, to leave everything behind. But where could she go? The old woman had implied that once you were noticed, you could never truly escape. Inside, the air felt thick, heavy with a strange stillness, as though the house itself were holding its breath. Emma set her keys on the table and rubbed her temples, fighting back a wave of exhaustion. She needed to know more. She couldn't just wait here, night after night, hoping the locks would hold. She needed to understand what these children were and why they wanted her. Her mind turned to the attic. When she and James had moved in, they'd only half explored it. Dusty boxes, broken furniture, forgotten trunks, it had seemed like little more than clutter left behind by previous owners. But now, she wondered if the answers might be hidden there. The attic ladder creaked as she pulled it down, the smell of dust and old wood hitting her as she climbed into the dim space. Sunlight filtered through a small cracked window, illuminating floating motes in the air. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, their corners soft with age, some tied with twine, others sagging and half collapsed. Emma began opening them one by one, sifting through yellowed papers, old photographs, and brittle clothing. Then she found it, a box labeled in faded marker, Harper Family, 1964. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, prying open the flaps. Inside were photo albums and a stack of letters bound with a ribbon. She flipped through the photographs first, her stomach twisting. Families posed stiffly in front of the farmhouse, children with wide eyes and solemn expressions standing at their parents' sides. Page after page, family after family. But what struck her most was how, in every photo, the children looked wrong. Their smiles were strained, their faces pale even in the faded black and white images. And in the backgrounds of several photos, half hidden in the trees, Emma swore she could see other figures. Small. Watching. Her hands shook as she untied the bundle of letters. They were addressed to a woman named Margaret Harper, written in a hurried scrawl. Emma read the first few lines aloud under her breath. They're at the windows again. The children. I don't know what they are, but they won't stop. Margaret, I hear them laughing every night. Robert says I'm imagining things, but I know the truth. They want our kids. They want Thomas and little Ann. I'm so afraid we'll lose them. Emma flipped to another letter, the ink smeared in places as though by tears or shaking hands. Thomas has started talking to them. I caught him whispering at his window last night, and when I asked who he was speaking to, he said, my new friends. Margaret, his voice wasn't his. It wasn't my boy's voice. It was theirs. The final letter was the shortest, the handwriting almost illegible, as though written in haste. They've taken Robert. He followed them into the woods, and he never came back. I can't protect the children anymore. I'm leaving before they take me too. The page ended abruptly, with no signature. Emma sat frozen, the letter trembling in her hands. The Harpers, an entire family, had lived here, and at least one of them had been claimed. Maybe all of them. She glanced around the attic as if expecting to see their ghosts crouched in the shadows. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She stuffed the letters into her bag and climbed back down the ladder, her legs barely carrying her. She needed air. She needed sunlight. She stumbled out onto the porch, clutching the railing, staring out at the line of woods that bordered the property. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, innocent in the daylight, but she could almost feel them watching her, waiting for nightfall. Her phone buzzed suddenly, making her jump. She fumbled it out of her pocket, glancing at the screen. No number. Just unknown caller. Her thumb hovered over the reject button, but some terrible curiosity made her answer. She pressed the phone to her ear, her voice shaky. Hello? For a moment, there was only static. Then, children's laughter. Emma's blood ran cold. She yanked the phone away, staring at it in horror as the laughter continued, spilling from the speaker, high and sharp and endless. She dropped the phone on the porch, her hands trembling, and it clattered against the wood. The call ended as suddenly as it had begun, the screen going black. Emma pressed her back against the wall, sliding down until she was crouched on the porch floor, her heart slamming against her ribs. They weren't just outside anymore. They were in her phone. They were in her house. They were everywhere. And then she heard it, the faint creak of a floorboard from inside the farmhouse. Emma froze, every muscle locking in place. The sound had come from upstairs. Slow. Deliberate. A footstep. But she was alone in the house. Emma's lungs felt tight, as though the very air around her had thickened into something heavy, unbreathable. She sat frozen on the porch floor, staring at the doorway as if it were the mouth of some vast animal waiting to swallow her whole. The creak had been undeniable. A footstep. Slow. Heavy. She wanted to believe the old wood had shifted on its own, settling with the temperature change, but her gut told her otherwise. She wasn't alone. For several minutes, she remained crouched, gripping the railing with white-knuckled hands, straining her ears. The house gave nothing back except silence. That made it worse. Silence meant intention. Silence meant something, or someone was waiting. Finally, she forced herself to move. She stood, unsteady, and reached for the porch door, her mind spinning. Should she run? Call the police? But what would she even say? There are ghost children in my house. I heard a noise upstairs. They would laugh her off, dismiss her, maybe even pity her. And besides, hadn't the old woman said that once they chose you, there was no escape? She couldn't run forever. Emma stepped back inside, her every sense screaming at her to turn away. The interior was dim, the shadows inside the farmhouse seeming darker now than the gathering dusk outside. Her phone still lay where she had dropped it, a silent black rectangle on the floorboards. She bent down and scooped it up, holding it like a talisman. No signal. Of course. She shoved it into her pocket and forced herself toward the staircase. Each step upward felt like walking deeper into a grave. The banister was smooth and cold under her palm, the creak of the stairs unnervingly loud in the silence. She paused halfway up, listening again. The house seemed to breathe, the faint rustle of shifting air whispering through the hallway above. At the top of the stairs, she froze. A figure stood at the end of the hallway. Small. Still. A child. Emma's throat closed, and a strangled sound escaped her lips. The figure was pale, bone pale, its outline blurred in the dim light. She couldn't make out its features, only that its head tilted slightly to the side, like a doll that had been carelessly propped against a shelf. She blinked, her heart pounding, and in that instant, the figure was gone. The hallway was empty. Emma's knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself forward. Room by room, she searched. The bedroom, empty. The guest room, empty. The small study at the end of the hall, empty. But when she entered the last room, the nursery, her stomach dropped. She had barely been in this room since moving in. The wallpaper peeled in yellowed strips, a faded pattern of balloons and toy blocks that looked grotesque in the dim light. A single rocking chair sat in the corner, its cushions moth-eaten, the wood splintering. But it wasn't the chair that made her blood run cold. It was the writing on the walls. Words scrawled in a jagged hand, overlapping again and again, carved into the plaster as though by something sharp. Emma stepped closer, her breath shallow, reading aloud in a whisper. Let us in. Let us in. Let us in. The words stretched across every wall, floor to ceiling, hundreds of them layered on top of each other like a chorus screaming in silence. Some were so deep that plaster dust still clung to the grooves. Others were faint, smeared as though written in haste. Emma stumbled back, her shoulder hitting the doorframe. Her mind reeled. Who had done this? The Harpers? Or something else? She was about to back out of the room when the rocking chair began to move. At first, just a faint sway, like a breeze had nudged it. But the air was still. Then it rocked harder, faster, the creak of its legs loud in the silence. Emma clamped a hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The chair moved as if an invisible child sat there, kicking its legs, eager to play. And then, from the shadows behind the chair, came a whisper. Emma. She staggered backward into the hallway, her heart hammering so violently she thought she might collapse. The whisper was high, lilting, unmistakably a child's voice, but it carried a weight, a depth that made her stomach lurch. It wasn't a child. Not really. Her body screamed at her to run, to get out of the house, but her legs refused to obey. And then, from downstairs, came another sound, the front door creaking open. Emma's blood froze. She knew she had locked it. She forced her body to move, stumbling down the hallway, nearly tripping as she reached the staircase. From her vantage point at the top, she could see the front door swinging wide. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it a faint chorus of giggles. Outside, standing in the yard, were at least half a dozen children. Their faces were indistinct in the fading light, their skin pale, their eyes dark hollows. They stood in a perfect semicircle, watching the house, their heads tilted in eerie unison. One of them raised a hand and beckoned. Emma clutched the banister, her entire body trembling. They wanted her to come outside. To follow them into the woods. She remembered the old woman's warning, if they take you into the woods, you don't come back. But before she could react, before she could even close the door, a sound from behind her made her turn. Footsteps. Light. Quick. Running down the hallway toward her. Emma spun around, and in that split second, she saw them, 3 small figures charging at her from the nursery, their faces twisted into wide, unnatural grins. And then the lights in the house went out. Darkness swallowed her whole. The darkness hit Emma like a physical weight. One moment the house was familiar, with its pale wallpaper and creaking floors, and the next it was nothing but shadow and whisper. Her eyes strained in the pitch-black interior, but there was no light, no shape, nothing to guide her except the faint echo of her own ragged breathing. She could hear the children moving, inside the house and outside it, 2 distinct choruses of giggles, soft tapping, and whispers that slithered around her like smoke. Emma's hand scraped along the wall, trying to find the stair railing, anything solid to hold on to. Her pulse was thunderous, her knees weak. The children were everywhere. Every time she thought she'd passed a room safely, she heard the faint brush of tiny feet behind her, and then the soft, unmistakable whisper, "Emma, come play." She remembered the front door. If she could just get outside, maybe she could run to the road, to the old woman's house, to anyone. Maybe there was still a chance. Emma stumbled down the stairs, her bare feet slipping on the worn wood. She froze mid-step. The front door was wide open. Outside, the children waited, their small figures outlined in the faint moonlight, standing perfectly still like statues of bone-white wax. Their heads tilted, eyes hollow and unblinking. They weren't smiling this time. This time, they were watching, assessing, as though calculating whether she would obey. Emma backed up, pressing herself against the staircase railing, her hands sliding along the wood. She had a choice. Inside, the other children were approaching, the whispering growing louder, more insistent. Outside, the children waited silently, patient but predatory. The old woman's warning rang in her mind, once they notice you, you cannot escape. Emma's breathing caught. She had to move. She had to choose. She bolted. First, toward the front door. Her hands found the edge of the frame, gripping it tightly, ready to slam it shut and lock herself outside. But the air outside was heavy and cold, the moonlight too thin to reveal anything solid. As she reached for the threshold, one of the children outside took a step forward, and she froze. Its movement was impossible, almost jerky, unnatural. Then another. And another. Within seconds, they were all moving, gliding across the yard, toward her, faster than any human child could. Emma screamed, spinning back into the house. She had no choice. She ran to the nearest room, her bedroom, throwing the door closed and pressing her back against it. The dark inside was oppressive. The whispers became voices now, distinct, rising and falling in a terrifying melody. "Come play, Emma. It's your turn. Come play." The floorboards creaked outside the door. She pressed her ear to the wood, her heart threatening to burst. Small hands rattled the doorknob. Tiny feet shuffled against the carpeted hall. She gripped the edge of the bed, knowing the door wouldn't hold them forever, that it was only a matter of seconds before it gave way. Her eyes darted around the room. The dresser drawers were half open. A lamp sat on the nightstand, cords dangling like snakes. She grabbed it, yanking it free of the outlet. Sparks hissed as she swung it at the door with all her strength. There was a thud, a scuffing sound, then silence. For a heartbeat, she thought she had driven them back. Then the whisper came again, this time from inside the room. "Emma, look behind you." Her stomach turned to ice. She whipped around slowly. The corner of the room was empty. Nothing. But the air shifted, carrying a faint, metallic scent, like rusted iron and damp soil. Her eyes flicked to the mirror across the wall. The reflection wavered strangely in the dim light, then, she saw them. Dozens of pale faces pressed up against the glass, not outside, but within the reflection itself. Children, hollow-eyed, grinning, their forms flickering like smoke caught in a draft. Emma stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the bed, her chest heaving. They weren't in the room with her, yet. They were inside the reflection, in the mirror, waiting. Then she saw something worse. A figure stepped forward from the reflection. Larger. Familiar. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the gait, the posture, the smile. James. Or at least what had been James. His eyes were hollow, the corners of his mouth stretched impossibly wide. He raised a hand in slow, deliberate motion, beckoning her toward the mirror. Emma scrambled backward, crawling on hands and knees, pressing herself against the far wall. Her mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, but none came. The children's whispers rose into a roar, filling the room from every angle, echoing inside her skull. The mirror flickered. Her own reflection wavered. And then, impossibly, the figure of James stepped out of the glass. Not fully, his feet didn't touch the floor, but enough to make her scream in terror. He, or it, leaned toward her, voice soft and distorted. Emma, it's time to play forever. The bedroom door slammed open with a force that rattled the walls. The children, hundreds of them now in the hall, swarmed toward her in silence. Their forms shimmered like shadows, some flickering in and out of existence, others solid enough to cast faint shapes in the pale moonlight. She backed against the wall, knife in hand, praying for some miracle. Then the mirror cracked. A long, jagged line ran from top to bottom, as though her scream itself had carved it. The reflection inside shimmered violently. The James figure twisted unnaturally, his eyes glinting with something Emma couldn't name. And as the shards of glass began to splinter, she heard it, one final whisper, echoing from every direction at once. Play with us, or join them. Emma felt the weight of the house pressing down, the shadows of the children converging, the chill of the forest seeping in through the walls. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee, to fight, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped. Between the children outside and the ones inside, she had nowhere left to hide. And then, from somewhere deep in the house, a new sound rose, a slow, deliberate clap. It wasn't playful. It wasn't human. It was sharp, deliberate, commanding. One clap. Then another. A rhythm. Waiting. Emma froze, knowing instinctively that whatever had done that was no child. And somehow, it was waiting for her choice. Emma's heart thumped so violently it felt like it might burst through her chest. The slow, deliberate clapping continued, echoing through the hallway and stairwell, resonating off the walls as if the house itself were joining in. It wasn't laughter. It wasn't whispering. It was a rhythm, a summon. Each clap seemed to press down on her chest, weigh her limbs, slow her thinking. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps as she pressed herself against the far wall of the bedroom, knife trembling in her hand. The children in the hallway hadn't moved yet. They remained frozen in their semicircle, pale faces tilted in that unnatural, uncanny way. Outside the front door, more of them waited, watching her silently. It was impossible to tell how many there were now. Hundreds? Thousands? They seemed to stretch infinitely, their forms flickering like shadows in a storm. The clapping stopped. And for a moment, the silence was worse than the noise, pressing in, heavy and absolute. Emma's ears rang. Her mind raced. She wanted to run, to barricade herself somewhere, anywhere, but her legs wouldn't obey. Something in her chest screamed to fight, to resist, but fight what? The children? Or the thing that commanded them? Then the mirror shattered completely. Glass rained to the floor with sharp, ringing crashes, and the figure of James, or what had been James, emerged fully, stepping down from the reflection as if the broken glass had been a veil between worlds. His eyes were black voids, hollow and unblinking. His lips curled into that impossible smile, stretching too wide across his pale face. Behind him, dozens of children poured from the mirror, their bodies shifting and flickering like smoke, but their eyes locked onto her with deadly intent. Emma stumbled backward, knife raised. "Stay away," she screamed, but the words felt meaningless. They weren't listening. They never listened. "James," or it, raised a hand, and the children froze mid-step. Then the sound began again, the clapping. This time, Emma realized it wasn't random. It had a pattern. Slow, methodical. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause. Like some perverse game she didn't understand, a game that required her to play by rules she didn't know. Her mind snapped back to the old woman's warning. They want to play, but only one kind of game. Emma's stomach turned to ice as she realized the truth. This wasn't just a game of chasing or teasing. This was a game she could lose. A game that had already claimed James. A game that might claim her next. She backed into the corner, knife trembling in her hands, eyes darting around for any escape. The children whispered again, their voices overlapping until it became a single, awful chorus. "Emma, come play, come play, come play." One of them, a small girl with hair hanging like wet seaweed over her pale face, stepped forward. Her eyes, black, empty holes, locked onto Emma's. She raised her hand slowly and pointed at the floor. Emma looked down. The carpet beneath her feet had changed. Patterns swirled unnaturally, lines forming shapes that pulsed like veins. It was a map, or perhaps a trap. Emma realized she had only one option, to follow the rules. She forced herself to her feet, every muscle quivering. The clapping continued, faster now, urging her forward. She edged toward the center of the room, keeping her eyes on the children, keeping the knife raised. Then James, or what had been James, spoke, his voice low and melodic, echoing in the corners of the room. "Step on the mark. Step correctly, or they win." Emma didn't understand, but she obeyed. She moved as directed by some instinct, following the marks on the floor that pulsed under her feet, counting steps, shifting weight, careful not to stumble. The children's whispers grew louder, more insistent, overlapping with the clapping until the sound became a deafening symphony. Her vision blurred. Sweat stung her eyes. Her legs shook violently. Every instinct screamed to stop, to run, to fight, but she couldn't. Somehow, impossibly, she reached the center mark. Everything froze. The children stopped moving, the clapping ceased, and the figure of James stepped closer, tilting his head like a predator studying a trapped prey. Emma could see the depth of the black in his eyes now, and a part of her mind screamed, that depth was infinite, and it held nothing human. "You've done well," he whispered. The words were soft, almost gentle, but they carried a weight that pressed against her chest. "But the game isn't over yet." The children surged forward suddenly, the room alive with movement. They pressed against the walls, crowding every corner, their whispers rising into a shrill scream. Emma dropped to her knees, clutching the knife as though it could protect her. And then she saw it, at the far end of the room, the nursery window had opened silently. A breeze from the woods rustled the curtains. Pale fingers, dozens of them, tapped against the glass from outside, beckoning. The children in the room split, creating a path straight to the window. Emma realized with a sickening certainty that this was the trap. Inside the room, she could not survive. Outside the room, she would be claimed by the children waiting in the yard. Her mind screamed in panic. She couldn't stay. She couldn't go out. And yet, she felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing on her from the shadows of the walls, from the broken mirror shards, from the dark corners. Her breathing became ragged. Her vision tunneled. And then, faintly, she heard the old woman's voice in her memory. "Once they notice you, you cannot escape." Emma's hands gripped the knife tighter, knuckles white, sweat pouring down her back. She realized, with horror, that she wasn't being tested for skill or courage. She was being tested for obedience, for fear, for her willingness to survive. One wrong move, one hesitation, and she would join them, inside the woods, inside the mirror, or worse, inside herself. The clapping started again. Slow. Steady. Methodical. Calling her forward. Emma swallowed hard, knowing that the next step she took could decide her fate. Emma's mind raced, each heartbeat pounding like a drum in the suffocating darkness. The clapping continued, slow, deliberate, unyielding, echoing off the walls and rattling through her bones. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, to flee, to throw herself out the window and risk the children outside rather than face the ones inside. But she couldn't move. Not yet. She had to think. She had to act. Her eyes flicked to the nursery window. Outside, the pale children were waiting, their figures motionless, like ghosts trapped in silvered moonlight. Their faces were hollow, their mouths frozen in grins that weren't quite human. She could see dozens, maybe hundreds, staring at her, patient but relentless. Inside, the children were advancing, whispering in unison, "Come play, come play, come play." Emma realized then that the children didn't need to chase her. They didn't need to touch her. They only needed her to be afraid. Fear was their power. Fear made them solid, made them move, made them bend reality to their will. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her trembling hands. If she could stop being afraid, if she could control her terror, even for a moment, maybe she could find a way out. Her gaze shifted to the shattered mirror across the room. The figure of James, or the thing wearing his skin, stood there, observing her with unblinking eyes. She noticed now that his feet never truly touched the floor. He floated slightly above the splintered glass, suspended in a subtle shimmer that made him seem unreal. Behind him, the reflection of the children writhed and flickered in impossible ways, as though the mirror were a portal to another world entirely. Emma forced herself to speak. Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but steady. "What do you want?" The figure of James tilted his head, smiling impossibly wider. "We want to play," he said, voice melodic, echoing unnaturally. "You can play with us, or join them. It's your choice." Emma's stomach churned. "I'm not playing your game." A ripple passed through the children in the room. They paused, tilting their heads in unison, as though surprised by her defiance. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, humming tone that resonated through the walls. It wasn't laughter anymore, it was a command. The children pressed closer, flickering at the edges like shadows ready to solidify into form. Emma knew instinctively that this was the moment of truth. If she hesitated, she would lose. If she ran blindly, she would lose. She had to understand, to confront the source of their power, to unmask whatever darkness animated them. Her eyes scanned the shattered mirror. A pattern formed in the shards, lines that connected like veins, converging on a single point in the center. That point shimmered with an unnatural light, faint and pulsing, drawing her attention. It was the source. She could feel it. The mirror wasn't just glass, it was a doorway. A tether between their world and hers. The children were bound to it, and through it, they could reach her, manipulate her, torment her. But perhaps she could use it against them. Emma's fingers trembled as she grabbed a shard of mirror from the floor. Its edges were jagged, cutting her palms as she held it up to catch the light. She could see the reflection of the children in it, distorted and flickering, but she noticed something strange. Whenever she focused on the shard, the whispers grew fainter, the shadows receded slightly. The shard was a key, a weapon, or at least, a way to level the playing field. Her breathing steadied. She took a step forward, then another, keeping the shard between herself and the advancing children. They hissed in unison, a high, keening sound that pierced her ears. But Emma didn't stop. She edged closer to the center of the shattered mirror's reflection, following the pulsing light. Each step was a battle against instinct, against fear, against the urge to flee. She could feel the shadows brushing against her skin, the children pressing in, but she forced herself to move forward. When she reached the center, she held the shard over the pulsing light. A sharp beam of reflected moonlight shot through it, striking the center point of the mirror. The room quaked. The children screamed, not human screams, but shrill, otherworldly shrieks that vibrated through the walls. The figure of James recoiled, his hollow eyes widening. Emma felt the darkness push back against her, felt the pull of the children trying to drag her into their world. But she pressed the shard closer, focusing all her energy, all her terror, all her will into the reflection. The mirror flared. Light exploded in her vision. The children screeched, twisting and flickering like smoke caught in a storm. And then silence. When Emma opened her eyes, the children were gone. The room was quiet. The mirror lay in shards around her feet, dull and lifeless. The nursery smelled of dust and old wood, nothing else. The oppressive weight had lifted. She sank to the floor, trembling, every muscle quivering. But then she noticed the front door. Wide open. And outside, the yard was empty. Too empty. Emma stepped toward the door, knife in hand, senses straining. The woods stretched beyond, silent and dark. No laughter. No whispering. No figures. Had she banished them? Or had they merely retreated, to wait for another night? Her mind flicked back to James. Where was he? She searched the yard, calling his name, but there was no answer. No trace of him anywhere. Had he been freed, or had he been consumed entirely by the children's world? The thought made her stomach twist in knots. She didn't want to look in the woods, didn't want to see what might be lurking there, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she wasn't safe yet. A faint rustle came from the tree line. Emma froze, heart hammering. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she didn't. She had survived the mirror. She had fought the children's influence and emerged standing. Whoever, or whatever, they were, they hadn't won completely. Yet. She tightened her grip on the shard still clutched in her hand, knowing she couldn't destroy it, couldn't leave it behind. It was her weapon, her shield, the only thing that kept them at bay. But as she backed toward the house, she realized with a cold, sinking dread, the children would return. They always returned. And when they did, she wouldn't be alone. Emma didn't sleep that night. The shard of mirror she held trembled in her hand, tiny flecks of glass catching what little moonlight filtered through the broken curtains. Every shadow in the house seemed alive, twitching, breathing, waiting. She moved carefully from room to room, making sure every door was locked, every window bolted, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they returned. The mirror shard was her protection, but it was fragile, and she felt it hum with a faint energy she didn't understand. As dawn broke, pale light spilling over the farmhouse, she forced herself to think. She needed answers. The letters in the attic had hinted at the Harper's fear, the mirror shard had proven some power in her hands, and the children themselves, whatever they were, clearly weren't human. But why? And why here, in this isolated farmhouse? She returned to the attic, dragging the shard with her like a talisman. The box labeled Harper Family, 1964 still sat in the corner, letters spilling over as though waiting for her to read further. She rifled through them again, this time searching for patterns, for hints that might explain the mirror, the children, the darkness that had claimed James. One letter fell out, different from the rest. It wasn't scrawled hurriedly, the handwriting was neat, precise, almost ceremonial. Emma unfolded it carefully, reading aloud. The mirror was never meant for us. It is a doorway. A vessel. We did not break it, it broke itself, drawn by their hunger. They are the hollow children, born not of flesh, but of the void beyond. They do not age. They do not sleep. And they play for eternity, feeding on fear and flesh alike. Do not look too long, do not follow the laughter, do not answer their calls. Once noticed, there is no return. Emma's hands shook. Hollow children, born of the void, she whispered the words to herself, trying to make sense of them. The letters hinted at something ancient, something older than the farmhouse itself. The children weren't simply spirits, weren't simply demons, they were entities, a force that thrived on terror, using mirrors as doors, using humans as playthings. Another letter fell out, and this one chilled her to the bone. James followed the rules. He stepped on the marks, counted the steps, obeyed the rhythm, but he forgot one rule: never look for the source. They want the game to feel fair. They want the illusion of choice. The mirror is their heart. Destroy it, and they retreat. Use it wisely, or it will consume you as it did the Harpers. Emma pressed the shard to her forehead, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Everything clicked into place. The mirror, the children, the laughter, everything revolved around the shard. It wasn't just protection, it was a weapon, a conduit. If she could use it correctly, she could banish them, or at least hold them at bay. If she misstepped, she would vanish like James, like the Harpers, swallowed into the void. Her fingers brushed another object in the box, a small, intricately carved wooden toy. It was a spinning top, painted in faded reds and blues. She remembered seeing it in the nursery, the first night she'd seen the children. They had been playing with one, always spinning, always waiting. Her stomach turned. The toy wasn't innocent. It was a marker, a sigil, part of the ritual that allowed them to cross into her world. Emma realized she needed more than instinct. She needed a plan, a way to confront them directly, and to destroy the tether that bound them to this place. She dragged herself back downstairs, clutching the shard and the spinning top. The house was silent, but the air was thick with tension. Every creak, every rustle could be a sign of their return. By evening, the first sound came, a faint giggle from the woods, delicate, teasing, carrying across the lawn like a knife through her chest. Emma's pulse quickened. She could feel the shard pulsing in her hand, resonating with the children's presence. They were coming. They had noticed her again. She positioned herself in the nursery, placing the shard in the center of the room and arranging the spinning top atop it. The letters had warned her of the ritual, though the exact details were vague. She counted her steps, moved carefully along the floorboards, positioning herself according to the faint lines she traced in the dust. The children's whispers grew louder, filling the room, echoing in every corner. Shadows flickered across the walls, growing more distinct with every passing moment. And then they appeared. Through the broken window, the silhouettes of pale children moved like smoke, gliding silently across the yard. Inside, figures emerged from the corners, their eyes hollow, faces fixed in eerie grins. James, or what had been James, stood among them, motionless, watching. Emma took a deep breath. The shard pulsed under her hand, warm and alive. She knew what she had to do. She placed the shard directly under the spinning top and lifted it slightly, catching the moonlight. The top began to spin faster, 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 until it became a blur of color, a miniature cyclone of motion and light. The children screeched, both inside and outside, their forms warping, flickering, losing substance. Emma stepped back, clutching the shard. The mirror's shards glimmered on the floor, catching the light, drawing the children toward the center. One by one, they twisted, shrieked, and dissolved into shadows that collapsed into the shard's glow. James let out a high, keening wail that echoed through the house, and then he too was pulled into the shard, disappearing completely. The room went silent. The shard cooled in Emma's hand. The nursery was empty. The windows were still. The woods outside were quiet. She sank to the floor, trembling, exhausted, but alive. For the first time since the laughter had begun, she felt relief. But deep in her bones, she knew this was temporary. The children had been banished, but the shard pulsed faintly, a reminder that the void still watched, that the hollow children were patient. They always returned. The farmhouse was quiet, but Emma didn't trust it. Not really. The oppressive weight had lifted, yes, but the air still felt heavy with a presence she couldn't see. She moved cautiously through the rooms, dragging the shard behind her like a lifeline. Every shadow seemed too dark, every floorboard too still. The wind outside rustled the trees softly, but it felt different now, as though the forest itself were holding its breath, waiting for something. Emma sat in the living room, clutching the shard and staring at the shattered mirror pieces around her feet. Her hands shook, her mind a whirlpool of exhaustion, fear, and disbelief. She had survived. She had banished the hollow children, at least temporarily. She had faced the figure of James, confronted the source, and lived. But surviving came with a price. She could feel it in her chest, a subtle, constant pressure that hadn't been there before, as if some part of the void had clung to her. It started subtly at first. Small whispers, barely audible, curling around the edges of her thoughts. She would hear them when she was alone, in the kitchen, in the attic, even outside as she walked the lawn. Come play, come play, come play. She tried to ignore them, convincing herself it was her imagination, a residue of trauma and fear. But then, the reflections began. Not in mirrors, but in every reflective surface, the windows, the knife blade, even the water in her glass. Sometimes, when she looked, she thought she saw a flicker of movement, tiny shapes twisting at the edge of her vision. Always just out of reach. Always waiting. Emma realized, with a cold, sinking dread, that the shard had not destroyed the children. It had trapped them, held them at bay, but their presence had left a mark on her. She was tethered to them now. She had touched the void, and the void had touched her in return. She tried to leave the farmhouse, to put distance between herself and the horror she had endured. But every time she stepped outside, the woods seemed darker, the trees taller, the shadows deeper. The air felt thick, alive with something watching. She understood now what the Harpers had feared most. The hollow children didn't just take the innocent, they left behind those who survived, twisted in subtle, inescapable ways. Survivors became extensions of the void. Observers. Sentinels. Perhaps unwilling, but tethered forever. Days turned into nights, and Emma's sleep became fractured, haunted by dreams of the children. In the dreams, they played endlessly, pale faces pressed against invisible mirrors, hands reaching for her. She would wake screaming, only to find the shard warm in her hand, vibrating softly, reminding her of the connection she could never sever. One evening, Emma was in the attic, sifting through the Harper letters again, desperate for a clue, when she noticed a line she had missed before. The mirror chooses its guardian. Once it binds, the bond cannot be broken. It feeds, it watches, it waits through the chosen. Beware the touch of the shard, it is both shield and leash. A shiver ran through her. She had survived the children's wrath, yes, but she was no longer fully human. Not entirely. The shard had tethered her to the void. She could feel its hunger subtly now, coiled around her mind like a whispering serpent. Every glance at a reflective surface reminded her, every shadow that shifted unnaturally, every creak of the floorboard. She was no longer simply Emma. She was a sentinel, a protector of the barrier between worlds, and that barrier was hungry. Weeks passed. The farmhouse remained quiet, deceptively so. Neighbors drove past without noticing the subtle darkness lingering in the air. Emma maintained the household as if nothing had changed, performing normal chores, answering the mail, keeping herself busy. But inside, she lived in constant vigilance, knowing that at any moment, the hollow children could test her, attempt to breach the shard's protective hold, and reclaim what they had almost lost. And then she saw it, a child, small and pale, standing at the edge of the woods beyond the lawn. At first, she thought she was imagining it. But the figure didn't flicker. Its head tilted in that impossible way, the same tilt she had seen countless times before. Its eyes were hollow, black as night. And it smiled. Emma's chest tightened. She knew with a certainty that made her knees weak, that this was a test. The shard pulsed softly in her hand, warming against her palm. She understood, finally, the true cost of survival. The hollow children didn't need to touch you, didn't need to cross fully into your world. Once noticed, once feared and survived, you became part of their game, their eternal vigilance. You became the keeper of the mirror. The child in the woods raised a small hand and waved, and Emma waved back, not in friendship, but in acknowledgement of a grim truth. She had survived, but she had not been freed. She was bound now, tethered to the void through the shard. Her life continued, but it was no longer her own. Every reflection she passed, every window, every puddle of water would remind her. She was part of the game, always watching, always guarding, always waiting. Emma felt a cold realization settle over her like a shroud. The children didn't just play for eternity, they enslaved those who survived to maintain the boundaries between worlds. And now, she was one of them. Not fully human. not fully gone. She looked down at the shard, still glowing faintly in her palm, and whispered, almost to herself. I survived. But I belong to them now. Outside, the woods were silent. Too silent. And somewhere, deep within the forest, she thought she heard a faint, distant giggle, echoing endlessly, reminding her that the hollow children never truly sleep. Emma's hands shook as she held the shard, its faint pulse echoing like a heartbeat in her palm. Days had stretched into weeks, weeks into months, and the farmhouse no longer felt like a home. It was a cage, a perimeter she maintained for the hollow children, and she had become their sentinel, their unwilling guardian. Every reflective surface, every shadow, every whisper reminded her of the bargain she hadn't chosen, the game she hadn't asked to play. Yet tonight felt different. The air carried a tension she hadn't felt before, a stillness that pressed like thick velvet over every inch of the house. The children had been silent for days, their absence unnatural, unsettling. Emma knew better than to relax, the calm always preceded the storm. She moved carefully through the living room, shard clutched tightly, listening for the faintest sound, the creak of a floorboard, the whisper of wind, or that chilling, high-pitched laughter. It came. Slowly. A whisper first, so delicate it could have been the rustle of leaves. Emma. Her stomach dropped. She wasn't alone. The voice grew louder, joined by dozens more, until it became the cacophony of countless children, all hollow, all grinning, all beckoning. She froze, knowing instinctively that tonight, the mirror, her shard, was going to demand its due. She stepped into the hallway, every instinct screaming, every muscle tense. The windows were dark, the forest outside pressing in. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw movement, the figure of James, or rather, what had been James, stepping forward, the hollow black of his eyes glinting. Behind him, the shadows shifted, and dozens of pale, small forms emerged, flickering like smoke. They flowed toward her, whispering, play with us, forever." Emma's mind raced. She had survived the mirror once, banished them temporarily, but the shard vibrated in her hand, warm and insistent. She understood the final truth: the children's game wasn't simply to capture or terrorize, it was to tether the living, to bind them, to make them custodians of the void. And now, after months, the final act was beginning. The children surged forward. Emma raised the shard, its surface catching the faint moonlight, and held it aloft. The air thickened, reality bending around her. The reflection of the children multiplied, twisting and warping in the shard, a kaleidoscope of pale, grinning faces. She felt the tug of the void, the pull of the children's endless hunger. One wrong move, and she would join them forever. And then she understood. The shard was not just a weapon, it was a test. The children wanted her to obey, to perform the ritual perfectly, but the final move was hers alone. They could tempt, threaten, whisper, beckon, but the choice remained hers. Survival or surrender. Emma's hand tightened on the shard. She stepped forward, toward the center of the living room, counting her steps precisely, moving with deliberate rhythm. The children's whispers rose to a crescendo, the sound of hundreds of voices layering in impossible harmony. Her eyes fixed on the shards scattered across the floor. She lifted the largest piece, aligning it with the shard in her hand. The two pieces connected, light flaring, a resonance that vibrated through the house. The children screamed, shrill, deafening, unnatural, as the shard pulsed violently. Shadows writhed across the walls, contorting into impossible shapes. The figure of James lurched backward, twisting unnaturally as the shard's energy drew them in. Emma felt the pull of the void clawing at her, trying to claim her as it had claimed so many before. And then, impossibly, the shard shattered completely. The fragments glowed briefly, brighter than the moon, then imploded inward, carrying the shadows with them. The children's screams ended abruptly, leaving a deafening silence. The hollow void, the laughter, the whispers, all vanished. The house felt still, empty, normal again. Emma collapsed to the floor, trembling. The shard was gone. The mirror's power was gone, or so she believed. She rose slowly, moving through the house, checking windows and doors. No shadows flickered. No giggles echoed. The forest beyond was calm. Too calm. Relief washed over her, brief and fragile. Then she reached the front porch. Moonlight spilled over the yard. And there, at the edge of the forest, stood a single child. Pale, hollow-eyed, head tilted in that impossible way. Its mouth stretched into a grin that mirrored every nightmare Emma had ever seen. She stepped back, heart hammering, but it didn't move. It simply stood, waiting. Emma's blood ran cold as she realized the ultimate truth: destroying the shard had not ended them. It had only returned them, subtly, invisibly, waiting. They didn't need mirrors anymore, they had tethered her. Her survival had come at a cost. She had become a conduit, a living sentinel, bound to watch, to protect, and to ensure the hollow children's influence endured. The house, the shard, the void, they were all connected to her now. The child's small hand lifted, pointing directly at her, and a whisper curled into her mind, clear, direct. "You belong to us now." Emma staggered back into the house, slamming the door, pressing herself against the wall, trembling. The final revelation hit her like ice water. She had survived, yes, but she was no longer free. Every reflection she passed, every shadow, every whisper would remind her. The hollow children never truly left. They never truly slept. She sank to the floor, eyes wide, breathing ragged. Her life continued, outwardly normal, but the invisible leash of the void tightened around her heart and mind. She was their guardian, their sentinel, their eternal witness. The children's game never ended, they only waited for the next player. And in the dead of night, when the moonlight glinted on a window pane, she sometimes thought she could hear the faintest giggle, echoing endlessly. What if the kids playing outside your window at night weren't really kids at all? Emma had survived to know the truth. And the truth was worse than death.